The autumn wind carried with it the scent of dying roses and burning wood, whispering through the cobbled streets of Aerolith, the capital of the kingdom. It was the kind of season where the world seemed caught between beauty and decay, when the leaves turned to flame and then to ash, and the air carried secrets only the wind could understand. It was on such an evening that Laurent Duval, a young artist of modest birth, received the letter that would change his life. The seal was royal, gold and crimson wax pressed with the crest of the king. The letter smelled faintly of lavender and parchment older than its words. His hands trembled as he opened it. The court required his presence, not to paint a nobleman's heir, nor to capture the likeness of some minor lord's estate, but to create the official portrait of the queen herself. Laurent's heart pounded as he read and reread the elegant script. The queen. Everyone in Aerolith knew of Queen Selene, a woman of unearthly beauty, married to King Adrian not for love but for alliance. Rumor claimed she was distant, a figure of grace rather than warmth, forever watched but never touched. For Laurent, a man who had lived in the shadow of wealth, surviving on commissions of merchants' wives and city gentry, the royal summons felt almost like a trap. He wondered if he was dreaming, until he read the signature at the bottom. The royal steward's hand, unmistakable and commanding. He had no choice but to obey. That night, Laurent could not sleep. He sat by the flickering fire in his tiny studio, staring at his own unfinished canvases, wondering why him. Surely there were court painters of higher rank and nobler blood. The thought nagged him, but so did something else. An inexplicable sense of anticipation, as though some invisible thread had been tugging him toward the palace long before the letter ever arrived. The palace of Aerolith rose like a stone hymn on the horizon. By dawn's pale light, Laurent approached its gates. Guards with polished armor and watchful eyes led him through sprawling halls draped in velvet and gold. He felt the weight of history pressing against him, the footsteps of kings and traitors and saints long gone echoing in every corner. He tried to steady his breath, to convince himself that he was only here to paint, to observe, to work. Nothing more. But when he first saw Queen Selene, the world shifted. She entered the royal solarium where the portrait would be painted, her figure framed by tall windows spilling morning light like liquid silver. Her gown was pale, almost ethereal, with embroidery that shimmered like frost. Her hair was dark, pinned with pearls, and her face, oh, her face. Laurent could not have prepared himself for the sight of her. There was a sorrow in her eyes, veiled but deep, as though she carried a grief too great for one heart alone. And yet, there was strength too, like a blade hidden beneath silk. For a moment, Laurent forgot to bow. She smiled faintly, as if amused by his awe, and the room seemed warmer for it. The first days passed in quiet ritual. Laurent sketched, studied her posture, her gaze, the delicate way her hands folded in her lap. She spoke little, as though guarding herself even from conversation. But her silence was not cold. It was heavy, intentional, a language of its own. Sometimes, when she thought him too focused on his work to notice, her eyes would wander to the windows, watching the distant horizon. There was longing there, fierce and unhidden in those unguarded moments. And Laurent, despite himself, began to wonder, who was the queen when no one watched? He told himself it was curiosity, the same curiosity that made him stare too long at sunsets or lose hours studying the shifting shadow of a candle. But deep down, he knew it was something else, something more dangerous. Every day, as her likeness took form on his canvas, he felt an invisible thread tightening between them, a silent connection neither dared to name. Then came the evening that shattered the delicate boundary between painter and queen. A storm had broken across the city, and thunder rolled like war drums beyond the palace walls. Laurent stayed late, perfecting the shading of her eyes in the portrait while the queen remained in the solarium, reading by the crackling fire. The rain lashed against the glass, and for once, Selene looked less like a queen and more like a woman stranded at the edge of the world. When she spoke, her voice startled him. "Tell me, Laurent," she said softly, "when you paint someone, do you see who they are, or only who they pretend to be?" The question lingered like smoke. Laurent hesitated, then answered with a truth that felt like confession. I see both, Your Majesty, and sometimes I see what they fear to become. Her gaze met his then, direct, searching, almost defiant. And in that moment, Laurent knew. She carried a secret, one that could burn down kingdoms if ever revealed. And so began the dangerous dance of love and lies. The days stretched into weeks, and Laurent found himself at the palace more often than his own home. He worked diligently on the portrait, ensuring every line and stroke captured not only the queen's likeness, but the shadowed poetry of her soul. Yet each brushstroke seemed to bring him closer to something perilous. He began to notice small things, how her eyes flitted toward the northern gates whenever the distant bells tolled, how the king, Adrian, barely acknowledged her presence in public gatherings, how whispers followed her down corridors like unseen ghosts. The palace was beautiful, yes, but beneath its gold and velvet lurked an invisible weight. Celine spoke little during sittings, but sometimes a sentence would slip past her guarded lips, a fragment of her inner world. "Do you ever wish you could paint yourself into another life?" she murmured once, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. "A life where love wasn't a cage?" Laurent's heart stirred. He knew better than to ask questions. He was a subject, she a queen. And yet, when he looked at her, he saw not power, but longing. One evening, while packing his brushes, he caught her staring at him. Not as a monarch looks at a servant, but as a woman might gaze at someone who sees her for who she truly is. Their eyes met for a moment too long. The storm outside roared, and then she looked away, as though terrified by her own thoughts. That night, Laurent returned to his tiny attic, unable to sleep. He dreamed of her, a queen behind glass, a songbird in a gilded cage. He awoke with his heart racing, whispering to himself, "This is dangerous," but danger has a way of making itself irresistible. A week later, the royal steward summoned Laurent urgently. He was led not to the solarium, but to the queen's private garden, a place whispered of but rarely seen. Lanterns glowed among ancient roses, their petals heavy with moonlight. And there stood Celine, her gown pale as the moon, her face unreadable. "I should not have called you here," she said softly, glancing toward the palace windows as if shadows had ears. "But there is something you must know." Laurent's breath caught. He felt the world tilt. The night air carried the scent of roses and danger. Before she could speak further, a rustle came from the hedges. Footsteps. Celine's face paled. "Go," she whispered sharply. "Not a word to anyone." He fled, heart hammering. As he slipped back into the main halls, he heard voices near the queen's chambers. Deep, suspicious. Someone was watching her. Someone who suspected. For the first time, Laurent realized the portrait was not just a painting. It was a weapon. And someone at court feared what it might reveal. Palace intrigue ran like an invisible current. Laurent began to overhear things not meant for his ears. Rumors of betrayal, letters intercepted, a queen accused in whispers of treachery. One night, while crossing the eastern wing, he stumbled upon a conversation between two courtiers. "The northern border prince. If the king knew, she'd hang." "Not yet," the other hissed. "The portrait first. Then we'll see what truth it holds." Laurent felt the blood drain from his face. A northern prince? Could it be that Celine's heart belonged elsewhere? The next morning, during their sitting, he studied her with new eyes. There was a wistful sadness in her gaze, a loneliness too deep to be faked. He wanted to ask, "Is there another man?" but feared the answer, and the danger of even posing the question. As the days passed, the connection between them deepened, even in silence. Once, while adjusting her veil, their hands brushed, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single touch. Neither spoke of it, but the air between them grew heavier. Meanwhile, the portrait itself began to take on an eerie life. As Laurent painted her eyes, he found himself infusing them with more than likeness. There was a story there, one he didn't yet fully understand. And it terrified him how much of himself he poured into it. Then came the night of the masquerade ball. The palace shimmered with candles, masks, and music. Laurent, granted rare permission to attend, wore a simple black mask. Among the dazzling nobles, he searched for her. When he found Celine dressed in midnight blue and silver, his breath caught. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and though hundreds danced between them, the world felt empty but for the two of them. But danger never slept. As Laurent turned a corner later that night, he overheard another whisper. After the portrait's unveiling, the queen won't see another dawn. The unveiling drew near. Tension coiled through the palace like smoke. Laurent worked feverishly, driven by something greater than duty now. If the portrait was to expose the queen's heart, he needed to decide. Would it condemn her or protect her? Celine visited the studio alone one evening. "They will use your art against me," she said quietly, "unless you choose otherwise." And then she told him everything. Her marriage to the king was political. Her heart belonged to a northern prince long before the crown claimed her. She had been forced to wed Adrian, forced to abandon the man she loved to secure peace. But letters still crossed the border, a fragile thread of a love that refused to die. If the court discovered them, it would mean treason and death. Laurent's heart ached, not only for her, but with jealousy of the unseen man who already held her love. Yet as she wept quietly in the candlelight, he knew his heart was lost to her, hopelessly. "I don't want your pity," she whispered, "but I thought you should know the truth." He wanted to say, "I would burn kingdoms for you," but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he promised silently, "The portrait will save you." The day of the unveiling came. Nobles and courtiers gathered like vultures, eager to see the queen-scene's soul laid bare. The king sat cold and unmoved, his eyes like stone. Celine stood regal, her heart pounding beneath silks. Laurent unveiled the painting. A gasp swept the hall. He had painted her with dignity, sorrow, and a quiet strength that no one could call treason. Her eyes, while deep with longing, gazed not northward, not toward any lover, but upward, as if to a future unseen. It was a masterpiece of ambiguity. It revealed everything and nothing. It told of a queen's heart, but not in a way that could be used as a weapon. The court murmured, unsure. The trap they hoped to spring had failed. That night, Celine came to Laurent's studio. Her eyes shone with tears. "You saved my life," she whispered. "But tell me, why?" And for the first time, Laurent confessed, "Because I love you." Silence hung heavy. She stepped closer. "And if my heart already belongs elsewhere?" "I know," he said, "and I love you still." Their lips met, a kiss stolen from fate. It was love, doomed and beautiful. They both knew it could not last. The court's eyes were sharp and Celine's love lay across the border. But for one night, they let the world fall away. One night, they chose love over duty. At dawn, she left him with a whispered promise, "I will never forget you." Laurent watched her walk back into her gilded cage. His heart shattered, yet he felt no regret. His love was not possession, it was sacrifice. Years later, when Celine's portrait hung in the royal gallery, whispered about by generations, no one knew the story behind her painted eyes. No one but Laurent, the painter who loved her enough to lie. And in those painted eyes, if one looked closely enough, there was a secret. Not just sorrow, not just longing, but the reflection of an artist who dared to love a queen.